Okay, so we're talking about investor outreach today. Let me pause this. So a little bit about me. I'm just going to do a real quick overview. I'm going to kind of fly through this so we can get to the end and you guys can ask me all of your fantastic questions. I'm also from the North and I talk fast, so there's that. But I have been in the VC world for over 10 years. I started as director of operations for a angel group venture capital firm called Golden Seeds. And I am the founder of VC Worthy Business. I work with female founders who are raising capital, anywhere from pre-seed through Series A. And I help them with wherever they are stuck in their fundraise, or I am around for the entire thing. And I love to hang upside down in an aerial silk. That is my happy place. Okay, so with investor outreach, the first thing, and this is, not just investor outreach, this is everything around your raise. I highly encourage you to plan. The number one thing that I see founders do or not do is plan out the different aspects of their raise ahead of time. And this goes with investor outreach. You really need to figure out what you are focused on, when you are going to spend time on this, and how you're going to execute it. So investor outreach can seem like this conceptual thing, or we're told, go out and get 100 or 200 no's before you get a yes. No, no, not at all. That's exhausting. Don't do that. So I tell all my founders, every woman I work with, you should have a half an hour to an hour booked in your schedule per day, 5 days of the week, take the weekend off, when you're getting ready to fundraise and in fundraising mode, that you spend on fundraising. It's non-negotiable time. And you can use that time for investor outreach. You should not be spending 4 or 5 hours on your fundraising efforts a day. You are not going to be fresh. You are going to be exhausted and burnt out. And then you're going to show up for potential investors as the worst version of yourself versus the best version of yourself. Slide. I just got to do this. Okay. So I want you, before you go out and start reaching out to investors, I want you to think through, what does your investor process look like? And the reason I talk about having an investor process and even creating it before you reach out to investors is because, I'm going to get a little bit of a soapbox here. You have all the control and the power from the beginning. And when you reach out to an investor, from the time that you reach out on wherever you reach out, it is a negotiation. How they perceive you, how they communicate with you, you communicate with them. It is negotiation. It is a power struggle from beginning to end. And so you need to figure out what you want your raise to look like, what you want your investor process to look like. I'm going to give you an example. This does not have to be yours. As women, you can raise capital in whatever way, shape, or form you want to raise capital. You don't have to do it the way that all the dudes have done it before you. Do it your own way. And I love that it's all women here. Blaze your own trail. Do what authentically, causes you to authentically shine through, because that ultimately is what an investor is investing in. And they're investing in you as a leader. So when you create an investor process that you take them through, you are showing them your leadership skills. So a sample would be, okay, you reach out to an investor, they say, absolutely, I would love to meet with you. You have a first meeting, you don't send them the deck ahead of time, and you don't pitch to them in the first meeting. I know, shocking, I know, things that are weird. You talk to them for 20 minutes, figure out if you like them, and if you like them, you try and get them to the second meeting. During that second meeting, that's when you pitch to them. And then after that, you take them into the next meeting, it's due diligence. And then after that, hopefully you're going on the, train to closing. But build out what each step in your process is and what that looks like for you. And you are driving them through that process. And that even includes if you are applying to a fund, you still should talk to general partners of that fund, drive them through the process before you apply. So you figure out what you need to be successful at your investor process before you even start. And before you start, and I'm so excited to hear that you have like ideal customers and you've gone through avatars and that is and done customer discovery, because you're basically going to repeat that process with investors. It is not about talking to anyone that has money, anyone that's an investor. That's going to lead to a lot of no's. It really is. And it's what a lot of founders do. And I get it. You don't know the space. It can be hard to figure out how to navigate it. And you don't need to know about it until you're in it, until you need it, right? And then it's a very short learning curve. But I want you to create your ideal investor avatar and sit in that. So just like your ideal customer, just like you got in that customer's head, I want you to get in the head of your ideal investor. What do you know about them? Are they married, not married? Do they have kids, no kids? Where do they live? What do they like to do for fun? Where do they vacation? What are their values? And the values should align with your values and your company's values. If they fight against your values, it's no bueno. So you need to really make sure their values align with yours. What are their fundraising habits, right? This is the easiest one. Do they invest in tech companies, right? At what stage do they invest in those tech companies? Is that similar to yours? What great exits have they had? What crappy exits have they had, or shutdowns? And from here, you can actually start to create questions that you sort of interview investors with to get an idea of, do they fit your criteria? But it also allows you to have a lens that you are looking through when you are building out your investor list. It also gives you a lens to look through when you are building out your pitch deck, when you're building out all of your pitching information. And I view pitching as any form of communication with an investor. You are pitching them for capital in any outreach that you do, conversations in person, your pitch deck, it's all a form of a pitch. And so you need to know who you're talking to, who you are attracting, who you want to attract, and who you want to invest in your company. You're not talking necessarily to an investor who, invests in CPG companies. That's not your investor. So be focused on who your investor is, and it can really inform when you are creating your investor list, who should be on it. So you should work on creating an investor list. You should have your top 10 to 15, not 300. So it should be a very small, short, concise list of people that you are focused on. And those are the ones that you're going to be figuring out where to find. You are going to be a detective. You are going to figure out, where do they live, meaning on social. Don't show up at their house. It just gets awkward and weird. But where do they live on social? So you want to look at, where are they active? Are they on LinkedIn? Are they on Instagram? Are they on Twitter? They're probably not on Facebook. I wouldn't try that one. Are they on Clubhouse? And if you're doing this for a short list of 15, it allows you to then do the next thing, connect with them. You can take that time that you set aside each week and reach out to that short list of investors and build a connection. You comment on things. You ask them open-ended questions. Maybe you retweet something. Because what you want to do, the last point, is connect with them as humans. Investors are human beings first. I know, weird things. They're not just walking money. And this is where you set yourself apart. Every other founder is looking at them as a walking checkbook, walking dollar signs, and they're constantly coming at them for money all day long. I get founders that literally on LinkedIn send me a pitch email about why I should invest in their company, and I'm like, I don't know who you are. What? No, that's a no. What? I have no idea who you are. And great, your traction looks lovely, but no, you spent no time to get to know me. You just see that I'm an angel investor in my LinkedIn profile. So connect with them on a human basis and look at them as just another person you're trying to get to know through the whole process, just another person you are trying to get to know. And when you are able to do that, you are able to hopefully take some of the pressure off of the situation of, hey, I am just figuring out if they're the right investor for me, if they're the right person in my life. I'm not trying to get them to invest. If they're going to invest, it will come. It won't come through the first conversation. It might not come through the second conversation, but it'll come if they're going to invest. So look at them as human beings. So get creative with your outreach and think outside of the box. You all are founders. You are disrupting verticals. You are thinking outside of the box, right? Think outside the box when it is about getting investors' attention. And don't reach out like every other founder, right? Don't send that spammy email. Talk to other founders and get referrals in. If you do know where they live, could you send them something? Who doesn't love getting a box in the mail? They're going to remember that. Like, what will make you memorable to them? And maybe you do something that is around your business of how you reach out, but get creative. Again, you don't want to just do what every other founder is doing, where they're, sending them cold emails, and sending cold emails has a very low response rate. It can be a waste of energy for a lot of founders. I don't want you to experience that. So lastly, before we get to questions, and I do see the questions in chat, is I want you to get in touch with your inner CEO. And I talked about this a little bit with the process that you take investors through, that they want to view you as a leader. I want you to make sure that you view yourself as a leader through this whole thing, and don't get lost in it. A lot of times founders can get to a place of desperation. They just want their thing out in the world, their business out in the world, their baby, and they're willing to take in whatever dollars and whatever terms. Please just give me money. When you come from a place of desperation, the investor has the upper hand. When you come from a place of strength and standing in what you are doing and what you know is amazing about your company, and getting in touch with that inner leader in yourself, you have the upper hand. And you also are showing them what kind of leader you are. And sometimes you have to fake it until you get there. But it's okay to be a CEO of one and be a CEO. You all are CEOs of your company, right? You do all the things, right? You wear all the hats, or you will wear all the hats, at least in the beginning, typically. And so be a leader of yourself first, and go into every conversation of, I am a badass CEO and I am worth investing in. Go into every conversation with that. And if you can get in touch with who your inner CEO is, like, how does she stand? What does she wear? How does she talk? How does she move? You can embody her, and that will allow you to, maybe feel like you have a little bit more control, and eventually you'll be her, right? Eventually, because she is you, right? It's another side of you coming out. Eventually you will be her, and you're able to let the investors see who's inside of you. That CEO who made the decision to start her company and go on this entrepreneurial journey, that is a CEO. When you made that decision, that was your first CEO move. And then joining Tech AF was also your second. Okay, and that's it. I kept it short and sweet so I could get to some questions. So I will stop sharing.
That was amazing.
Okay.
Thank you.
So, okay, no questions. Okay, so ideal investor. Yeah. Okay. Who has questions? There's a lot.
I have a question.
Yeah, please.
Yeah. So you mentioned like the first meeting where you don't pitch, you just kind of want to get to know. Can you give like some insight or some more details around like what that conversation looks like? That's the first question. And then the second question, could you offer like some questions, like what are like top 3 things that we really should be looking for to see if they're a match for us?
Okay. To answer that last question first, you should know that. So it's I would push it back on you and say, what are your top 3 non-negotiable things an investor has or has in their experience? Is it, they need to have corporate experience? Or do they need to have, entrepreneurial experience? Or do they need to have exited from an investment? Do they need to invest in, I would leave stage out of it. I mean, that's inherent, right? Stage is, you're looking at, pre-seed investors or seed investors that invest in women. That's like super high level, right? You're going down deeper. What are your top 3 non-negotiable things that an investor has? It could be they write a check and leave you alone. Or it could be they get involved and they're supporting you. Maybe you need marketing experience, so they're going to help you with marketing connections. Or maybe they have connections to potential partnership that you want in with. So like, what are your non-negotiables? And you don't have to have just 3, you can have 5 if you want to. Okay. So that first conversation is a really short conversation. It's about 20 minutes, maybe 30. It is a true networking connection conversation that I recommend go something like this. Hey, Mr. or Mrs. Investor, tell me about yourself. And you let them talk. And you don't ask them questions about just fundraising. You get to know them. And then they inherently, because it's human nature, will ask you about you. And you can even ask them, how can I support you? And if you ask them that, they will in turn ask you that question. And so it is not about you then when it's your turn to talk about your company. It is your turn to talk about yourself. Maybe there's something in your experience that you really want to highlight that makes you an expert. Or maybe there's something, in your experience, it's really a fascinating story that allows them to connect with you. And then you say, and I also have, my startup. They will probably ask you a little bit about it because that's the world that they're in and they're used to doing that. But it's not you searching for them, to ask you to pitch. It is really you gauging how interested they are in you. And then if you can transition into your company and spend a little time there to see how interested they are in your company. If they're interested, they'll ask you to pitch for them. And that's when you schedule the next call or in-person meeting. By staggering the meetings out, you're able to gauge interest. Investors are creatures of habit. They will always ask you for your pitch deck, whether they want to see it or not. And then you send it on DocSend and they look at it for literally 2 seconds and you can see it. And they know you can see it, but somehow they only look for 2 seconds. And then they don't get back to you, or they tell you they're not interested. And you're like, but you were only in there for 2 seconds. I can see it. How did you even know what I do? So they're just sort of blowing you off, right? And so it's you trying to really control it so that you can gauge their interest and gauge yours, because you can say no to an investor, right? Someone might not be right for you. So in that first meeting, you might walk away and say, you know what? I don't want to offer to pitch for them. I don't think they're right. I'm just going to say, it's nice to meet you. And so your ideal investor avatar can also really help you when someone asks you who you're looking for connections to. You can better describe who you're looking for in an investor that can paint a picture for them of who they know. And so you can say, hey, not going to take this to the next level, but I'm really looking for this type of investor. Do you know of anyone? And would you be willing to make introductions? What other questions?
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to go, Jamie?
No, go ahead.
Okay. Thanks for sharing, Lauren. My question is, what do you consider pre-seed? Because I think that there's just different definitions of pre-seed. So I just wanted to know, what's your definition of pre-seed?
Yeah. And it slowly changes. And I think, in this economy, it also is changing a little bit. Pre-seed can be pre-revenue. But there needs to be some tangible traction there that shows that even though you don't have revenue, there is with the influx of capital. Pre-seed is usually a smaller amount of influx of capital, that revenue is right there. And it depends on the sector that you're in too. So investors, everyone's created a little bit differently of what their risk tolerance is with pre-seed. And so it's also figuring that out. Some pre-seed investors want to see revenue, and that's a hard and fast rule for them. Some are more forgiving. Some will invest in the ideation stage. That's becoming more and more rare, and it is very rare for women to get pre-seed at just the idea stage. But when you have some of the tech built out and you can show them this is where we are, I would say that that's pre-seed.
Thank you.
And I would recommend all of you now, if you're thinking about raising capital, or even if you're not sure, which is also okay, is to start meeting with investors that are pre-seed investors and just get to know them and ask them these questions. And so you can get a better idea. And you're also filling up your list of ideal investors. So when you're ready to hit the go button, you know who you're going to reach out to, and you're keeping in contact with them and keeping them updated. And they might even come in and help and support you in building out your company before they invest. So I encourage, and they could help you make a decision, right? It could be eye-opening of, okay, yes, I'm gonna go and raise capital now, or you know what, I can keep going and I can do it without an influx of capital. So I encourage founders to always just go out and have investor conversations and attend events and just get out there, because the more you're out there, the more you're going to pick up. So if you do raise capital, the more you're familiar with this world and our weird terms and way of doing things.
Thank you.
Sure.
Speaking of weird terms, so you said due diligence in your third meeting, and I know what that means in like a house purchase, but can you define what that looks like through this process?
Yeah, I mean, it's basically sort of the same thing, kind of. I think it depends on what state you're in for due diligence.
Sometimes it takes just as long.
I mean, especially here in Georgia, I mean, the waiting period alone. So it's basically them looking under the hood to see and kicking the tires and to see if there's enough there. And so it's things like, different for every business, but it's things like your financial model. If you have revenue, what does your P&L look like? Your balance sheet. What does your team look like? What do you look like? Your background experience. If you have an advisory board, tell them about your advisory board. Any information and so all this lives in a data room, by the way. So that's where, and a data room can be a Google Drive folder. It doesn't have to be anything crazy. But anything that you refer to, statistics, studies that you were even talking about in your executive summaries, like those would go in a data room, because investors might want to check back on those connections to what you refer to in your pitch deck. Future, team that you want to build out. If you have any customer testimonials or customers that they can talk to, that's also great. So really anything, I always tell founders, if I gave you $5 million to invest in your company, what would you need to make a sound decision to invest in yourself? And so taking that step back and saying, okay, is this enough information? And it doesn't have to necessarily be 100 things. Investors won't look at all of them. And they will inherently ask you for something that you don't have prepared, because that's what they do. So you don't have to put the kitchen sink in, but it's enough for them to make an educated decision. And when you're going into due diligence, just because one investor asks you for something doesn't mean you should necessarily share it with all other potential investors, because the more you give them, the more they're going to scrutinize. And I'm not saying hold things back and, that you have a leaky roof and you're covering it up. Not that kind of thing. I'm talking about like, it's not really necessary to make a decision. Like, this is inconsequential, but this one investor asked for it, so I'm going to put it in there. But if you put information in there, they're going to look at it and they're going to ask you questions about it. And so you just want to make sure that it's enough. It's all you need is just enough for them to make a decision. And if they need more, they'll ask you for more.
And is this actually like a fixed amount of time? There is like a due date? Like, no, this can just sort of go on until either I say I need a decision or they say I've made a decision?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And,
Okay.
and really, you want to try and speed it along as much as possible. If you're dealing with institutional funds, typically they have a set process, and you're going to know when their meetings are of their general partners to make a decision. But if you're dealing with angels and, it's a little bit more, especially individual angels, it's a little bit more wishy-washy. And, it can take upwards of 3 months to get through due diligence. The goal though is to really, how can you figure out, are they a yes or a no? And like, if they're on the ledge, how can you help them make a decision? Because you just need to know, right? Like, it's okay for it to be a no, but you just need to know if it's a yes or a no so you can move on.
Okay. Thank you so much for that.
Sure. Any other questions? You guys are all rock stars. Thank you so much for sharing your businesses with me this evening.
Thank you for sharing your knowledge. I love the inner CEO. I love that part. My inner CEO is called Badass Betty. And so anytime that I'm like doing anything, I channel her. So she's
Nice.
my go-to. And then I also really loved we were talking about in the beginning. I just lost my train of thought. What were you talking about in the very
What
beginning?
time is it?
There was something that you said. I was like, oh my gosh, that's so brilliant. Oh, setting up your own process. And that shows them how prepared you are. And it shows them your leadership skills. Like, I've never thought about that before. And I think that's really important, right? It's like, you're owning that process. How receptible are investors to that? Like, how do you communicate your process, so to speak, I guess? Is it just in how you're communicating back and forth with them and pushing off the pitch to the next time? Or are you like, this is my process?
I think, you can communicate it. I think it's more taking them through. It's not outwardly showing your leadership. It's them experiencing it is the most important part, because that will then help them build confidence around you as the person that's going to take this company to the end. And that's my husband coming home for our date night, and my dog's my dog does the same thing.
Yeah, I know that all so well. Well, thank you so much, Lauren. We really appreciate it.
Wait, I have a question. I know we all have to leave, including myself, but how can I ask you more questions?
Yeah, I will put my email in the chat.
Okay, thanks.
And feel free to email me, ask me all of the questions. I think I spelled that all right. Feel free to email me all your questions and I will happily get back to you guys. These are all good questions, so I know you have more.
All right.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. All right, everyone, have a kick-ass week.
Thank you.
Bye.